The woman was shocked to discover her husband's mistress bore an uncanny resemblance to her close friend, though the photo didn't capture the woman's face. Her friend Lu Li's earrings were identical to those in the picture. Xiaomei's sudden change in expression instantly alerted the relaxed Lu Li. Knowing she couldn't reveal the photo, she resolved to uncover the truth. But she quickly began testing Lu Li with her words. Xiaomei said she knew the woman her husband was cheating with had been right beside her all along. Lu Li was stunned for a moment, but since Xiaomei didn't name the person, she quickly directed suspicion toward the housekeeper. Xiaomei tacitly agreed with Lu Li's assumption, but she swiftly moved on to the second step of her plan. She informed Lu Li of an urgent business trip that day, then borrowed her Bluetooth earbuds, secretly installing a tracking device inside the charging case when Lu Li wasn't looking. Sure enough, that evening when she tracked Lu Li's location, the scene she dreaded most unfolded. Lu Li was right at her own home. She hurriedly unlocked her car door, determined to return home and expose everything. But the moment she stepped inside, her pace slowed involuntarily. Xiaomei hesitated. Confronting them would shatter not only their decade-long friendship, but also destroy her own family. Just as she wavered, her husband suddenly emerged from the bedroom. The truth was within her grasp, yet Xiaomei lost all courage. Not only did she give her friend time to hide, but in a moment of carelessness, she stumbled down the stairs. Hearing this, Lu Li sensed her chance had come. She intended to frame Xiaomei outright, but her lover fiercely blocked her attempt. While his wife lay unconscious, Go Dan urged Lu Li to leave immediately. In their panic, they failed to notice the entire scene had been witnessed by the nanny lurking in the shadows. And the nanny, Cui Hua, had come seeking revenge too. 3 years prior, on the brink of marriage, she'd been abandoned by her fiancé who'd also swindled her entire fortune. Crawling for her life in her quest for vengeance, she'd barely survived, but her body was already beyond recognition. After 3 years of skin graft surgeries, she finally returned with a face no one knew. The few unhealed scars she left behind served as a constant reminder never to forget her deep-seated hatred, though she discovered her enemy had remarried upon her return. This did not deter her vengeance. To monitor her enemy's every move, she not only rented an apartment across from his company, but also infiltrated their home under the guise of a nanny. To spare the innocent, she first sought to reveal Godan's true nature to Xiaomei. After all, directly sharing her ordeal, Xiaomei would never believe this newly arrived nanny. Unexpectedly, upon waking from her coma in the hospital, Xiaomei not only discovered she was pregnant but was also manipulated by her husband, who had prepared countermeasures in advance. Under her husband's barrage of sweet talk, Xiaomei gradually let down her guard. Everything that had just happened seemed to vanish into thin air at that moment. Go Dan intended to return home to check if any evidence remained from last night, but the nanny's rosy cheeks instantly sparked his twisted desires. Powerless to resist, the fragile Cui Hua could only endure his reckless advances. Yet just then, the scars on Cui Hua's body reignited his suspicions. Seeing his cover about to blow, the doorbell rang at the perfect moment. This provided Cui Hua with her chance to escape. Yet when she opened the door, she discovered it was none other than Lu Li. Go Dan certainly didn't want their affair exposed to the nanny, so he decisively pulled Lu Li outside. It turned out Lu Li feared retaliation for yesterday's incident. She had come seeking Go Dan to flee together, but Go Dan assured her the matter was not only resolved, he had even established her as a virtuous figure in front of Xiaomei. Hearing this, Lu Li's worries eased, but having finally mustered the courage to flee, she wasn't about to let this chance slip away. She believed her love, though forbidden, was at least genuine. Little did she know her so-called love was merely a pawn in Godan's scam scheme. To reassure Lu Li, Go Dan planned to bring her to the company office for a heart-to-heart. Little did he know Cui Hua captured this scene on camera once more. Fuming, she rushed home, desperate to exact revenge on Go Dan, but she still hadn't found any incriminating evidence against him, so she quickly hatched a devious plan. She grabbed Go Dan's personal toothbrush and began scrubbing it in the toilet. The sheer satisfaction she felt in that moment was indescribable. Only when the toilet's stench perfectly matched the brush did she return it to its place. The next day, Go Dan brushed his teeth with that same toothbrush and detected a familiar scent. He racked his brain but couldn't pinpoint its origin. Since he couldn't figure it out, he just kept brushing. Now faced with his wife's billions, Go Dan quickly forgot about the nanny's identity. Today, He spotted a lipstick mark on his shirt. He knew it was Lu Li's. To avoid his wife's notice, he tossed the shirt into the outdoor trash bin. But as soon as he left, the nanny retrieved it. Today happened to be Xiao Mei's birthday party. Lu Li arrived, dressed provocatively. This naturally prompted Xiao Mei to question her best friend's intentions. Unexpectedly, after just a trip to the restroom, she spotted the shirt with the lipstick stain. This instantly made her realize her husband's words from days ago might have been nothing but lies to placate her. To prove her suspicion, Xiao Mei quickly recalled the things her best friend had just said. Then she picked up the shirt and sniffed the lingering perfume scent. Sure enough, it was her best friend's signature perfume. Filled with rage, she stormed into the hall. Though she had many female friends, this particular confidant full of lies was instantly singled out. She wanted to confront her friend head-on to vent her pent-up resentment. But just then, she suddenly considered the consequences of such an action. Stirring the pot might alert her husband and make him wary. To uncover her husband's true motives for marrying her, Xiao Mei quickly devised a new plan. Though she announced shared assets, her husband couldn't possibly transfer the money. These were company assets. Any withdrawal required her personal signature. Today's announcement was nothing but a blank check. But just as her plan began, Go Dan slipped up. Cui Hua secretly slipped into the mistress's clothes and walked straight toward Go Dan. This instantly caught his eye. He'd been plotting this for ages. It wasn't until the subsequent massage techniques that a sense of déjà vu washed over him. Their actions quickly drew Xiao Mei's attention. Xiao Mei not only issued a warning to the maid alone but also threatened her with dismissal. But Cui Hua didn't take it seriously, for her objective had already been achieved. Just moments ago, she had successfully gotten Go Dan to leave his fingerprints on her body. Soon, she not only extracted the fingerprints but also made a finger model. And just like that, she successfully opened the safe in her employer's home. Originally, she intended to find evidence of Go Dan's crimes. Unexpectedly, the safe contained nothing about Go Dan except Xiao Mei's belongings. Clearly, her plan had failed again. It seemed Go Dan remained highly vigilant. Today, Xiao Mei had planned to confront her husband with that shirt bearing lipstick stains, but Go Dan easily brushed it off with a simple explanation. Then Xiao Mei remembered her husband secretly transferring money yesterday. The transfer failed because it required her handwritten signature. Seeing this, Go Dan quickly made up an excuse to cover it up. He even shamelessly declared he would never part with Xiao Mei for the rest of his life. Xiao Mei understood exactly what his final words meant, though she had no direct proof about the shirt. The photo the housekeeper sent her yesterday made her instantly recognize her own best friend, but to save her marriage, she chose not to pursue it. This was precisely why the housekeeper had always hesitated to reveal Go Dan's true nature to Xiao Mei, because even if she told her, Xiao Mei might not believe it. That's why the housekeeper had been quietly warning Xiao Mei behind the scenes, hoping she'd see Go Dan's true colors before it was too late. But Xiao Mei wasn't one to let a grudge go, especially when it came to her husband. Soon, she took her anger out on her best friend. Not only did she publicly reject her friend's proposal at work, she also falsely accused her of plagiarism. In the end, she fired her friend outright. Then she revoked the property sharing agreement she'd announced just days before. She thought this would force her husband to come to his senses. Little did she know her husband's true target was her multi-billion fortune. Moreover, she became the largest mark on his fraud list because she gave him the opportunity to deceive. Go Dan swiftly moved to his next plan. Today marked the mother-in-law's first visit to their home. Unexpectedly, Cui Hua instantly recognized the same tactics used on her years ago. Moreover, every word the mother-in-law uttered afterward was something the maid could recite verbatim, though the script remained unchanged word for word. The mother-in-law's subsequent actions were entirely different. Not only did she bring Xiao Mei prenatal supplements, she made her drink them right in front of her. Cui Hua wondered if their scheme had been upgraded, but one thing she was certain of: these supplements were definitely tainted. When Cui Hua handed over the tonics, the mother-in-law immediately gave herself away. Under his mother's intimidating glare, Go Dan had no choice but to grit his teeth and drink it down. But the moment he finished, he bolted to the bathroom and vomited it all up. His mother warned him he must make Xiao Mei drink those tonics. Since Xiao Mei changed the agreement again, we'll just have to find a way to drive her insane. Sure enough, The supplements the mother-in-law brought were a slow-acting poison meant for Xiaomei. This mother-in-law and Godan weren't actually mother and son, they were partners. And their true identities? They were part of a scam ring preying on wealthy women. Moreover, Cui Hua's earlier actions had already caught the cunning mother-in-law's attention. The moment they decided to target the nanny, Xiaomei would soon see Godan's true colors. Xiaomei had merely received a call from her aunt when she unexpectedly uncovered the nanny's true identity. Her aunt personally told her the nanny she recommended had a slightly sprained ankle, but Xiaomei recalled the nanny who had come earlier, not only young and beautiful, but walking with such ease and confidence that there was absolutely no sign of a sprained ankle. Then she recalled that ever since the nanny arrived, her husband had been cheating with her best friend. Moreover, her husband was secretly transferring their marital assets. This instantly made her suspect that the nanny was secretly orchestrating everything. Without delay, she returned home determined to confront the nanny, mistakenly believing the nanny might be her husband's other lover. She not only slapped the nanny hard but also prepared to kick her out. Yet trapped in this marital deception, she never dreamed the nanny had come solely to exact revenge on her husband. Moreover, without the nanny's covert assistance, her husband would have already swindled away her entire multi-billion fortune. The nanny knew her employer was naive, but never imagined she'd be beyond redemption. Still, as a fellow woman, she felt compelled to offer one final warning before leaving. Do you really think your husband's betrayal is just about infidelity? Though the nanny knew her warning might change nothing, she still hoped to use every ounce of her power to stop the victim in her trap. Brainwashed daily by her husband, the woman couldn't fathom the nanny's true meaning. Unexpectedly, the fired nanny was immediately intercepted by Godan upon stepping outside. It turned out Godan was the one who exposed her identity. Ever since nearly botching their big scheme last time, Godan had been seething with resentment. He'd tracked down the nanny's true identity. That's why Godan orchestrated today's plan using his wife's hand to drive the nanny from their home. Returning home, Cui Hua felt utterly lost in her revenge plot. Just as she was at a complete loss, a new ally emerged. This ally was none other than Godan's most trusted assistant, who, her purpose in approaching Godan was, of course, to avenge her sister. It turned out her sister had also been a victim. Not only had she been swindled out of her entire fortune, but ultimately, unable to bear the pressure from debt collectors, she chose to jump to her death. They discussed that the only way forward now was to lure Xiaomei into the trap. Only then could she fully see Godan's true colors. They concluded that without Cui Hua's covert assistance, Godan would inevitably keep transferring Xiaomei's assets out. Once a woman becomes love-struck, she truly is beyond saving. As expected, without the nanny's assistance, Xiaomei was drugged by her husband daily. Once she passed out, he'd transfer funds and delete the records. Meanwhile, assistant who successfully used her position to obtain evidence from Godan's computer. She called Xiaomei again from that unfamiliar number. The person on the other end wasn't just her husband's assistant who, but also provided an address where she could see her husband's true colors. Xiaomei arrived at the location with a mix of skepticism and hope. There she discovered her husband had been secretly meeting with her best friend all along. All his recent promises to end the affair had been lies. Only now did she realize how utterly foolish she'd been. To save their marriage, she had tolerated everything about him, even forgiving his infidelity on the spot if he promised to change. Yet all her sacrifices had been nothing but a scam her husband used to manipulate her. This time, however, she had learned her lesson. Instead of confronting him immediately, she devised a plan to uncover all her husband's hidden secrets. To pinpoint the right direction, she recalled the words the maid had spoken when she first entered the house. The gift the maid had mentioned was actually meant to help her see her husband's true character, yet she had ended up kicking the maid out. Now she regretted it deeply. Then she recalled the nanny's parting warning. A chain of associations made it clear. The nanny wasn't just her husband's enemy. Their relationship was far more complex than she'd ever imagined. But these were still just her suspicions. To uncover the truth, her only option was to find the nanny. It signaled the end of Godan's comfortable life. Xiaomei was stunned to discover the nanny's walls plastered with portraits of her enemy, her own newlywed husband. The nanny's subsequent actions would reveal Godan's true nature to Xiaomei. 3 years prior, to swindle Cui Hua out of her millions, Godan had not only disguised himself as a beauty equipment investor, he even orchestrated a beauty equipment exhibition to arrange their chance encounter. Cui Hua, who ran a beauty salon, was quickly drawn to the exhibition. Under Godin's relentless pursuit, they soon began a relationship. Back then, Cui Hua felt their meeting was fate itself. It wasn't until she discovered her home under court seizure during her pregnancy that she fully realized this was a meticulously planned scam. But by then, it was too late. Not only had her millions been drained, but she'd mortgaged her home and beauty salon for him. In her desperate attempt to reclaim everything, she even risked her life. Fortune smiled upon her, sparing her from the brink of death. Cui Hua never imagined that sharing her ordeal would awaken Xiao Mei to reality. Yet now, Xiao Mei, lost in love, had completely lost her basic judgment. Cui Hua had considered simply abandoning her to her fate, certain Xiao Mei would eventually regret her choices. Yet, as calm returned, her own plan for revenge resurfaced. Desperate for one last chance, she played her final trump card. Cui Hua intended to use the scars covering her body to prove her story was no fabrication. But despite exhausting every tactic, she still couldn't fully pull Xiao Mei back to reality. Xiao Mei remained only half convinced. Yet once doubt had taken root, complete belief couldn't be far behind. Soon, Assistant Hu's side also advanced their next phase. While the boss was out, she secretly planted a listening device in his office to capture crucial evidence. Sure enough, new clues emerged shortly after. Xiao Mei, fed daily by her husband with nerve-stimulating supplements, began fainting frequently. That day, Godin tricked her into going to the hospital and bribed the doctor to issue a diagnosis of pregnancy anxiety. Her partner gloated, "With this psychiatric evaluation, half our plan is complete." She then produced 2 plane tickets to Phuket, Thailand. They believed their scheme was flawless. These words were picked up by Cui Hua through the listening device. But it wasn't over yet. As she listened, another clue emerged. This was the president of a bank, Godin's next target. It turned out Godin had already mortgaged the woman's property. Once he returned from Thailand, he would become her sole heir. And of course, these words reached Cui Hua's ears. They had reached a level of utter depravity. Cui Hua tried to contact the woman, only to find her number had been blocked. Today was their departure date. To stop this, Cui Hua risked everything, driving recklessly in a desperate attempt. Her intended target was the scumbag Godin. But in the urgency, Xiao Mei sacrificed herself to save her husband, nearly losing her own life. Fortunately, Cui Hua reacted in time, leaving Xiao Mei with only superficial injuries. But it was precisely those injuries that saved her life. Their departure plans were temporarily delayed. They knew this delay wouldn't last long. To make Xiao Mei see the truth quickly, Assistant Hu took advantage of her boss's absence and went straight to Xiao Mei's home today. Since Assistant Hu was her husband's assistant, Xiao Mei wouldn't be suspicious of her. Taking advantage of Xiao Mei's inattention, Assistant Hu placed a pre-prepared listening device inside a flower pot for future evidence collection. She knew Godin had long since pawned Xiao Mei's jewelry. Assistant Hu casually noticed multiple scratches on Xiao Mei's $1 million necklace. Her offhand remark exposed all of Godin's hidden schemes. Xiao Mei then retrieved all her jewelry. She discovered her husband had replaced every single piece worth a staggering 30 million yuan. To uncover her husband's true nature, she kept this discovery secret. That night, in her sleep, she faintly sensed someone biting her neck. The assailant wore a pig-head mask. Suspecting her husband, she remained exceptionally vigilant that evening. To prove this wasn't a dream, she forced herself to get up. Summoning her courage, she hid behind a wall to see the masked figure's face. As expected, it was her own newlywed husband. She finally realized the nightly nightmares she'd endured were deliberately orchestrated. Immediately, she recalled what Cui Hua had told her days earlier. At the time, Xiao Mei had thought Cui Hua was merely trying to drive a wedge between them, but now it seemed Cui Hua's words were all true. She intended to contact Cui Hua to uncover more secrets, only to discover upon opening her phone that she had long since blocked Cui Hua's number. Yet she was certain she hadn't done it herself. Then she recalled the night a few days prior. She had vaguely sensed someone using her fingerprint to unlock her phone. After waking, she had always believed it was just a dream. Now it all seemed real, and her husband must have blocked Cui Hua on her phone to hide his secrets from her. In that moment, Xiao Mei felt her husband was utterly terrifying. She quickly unblocked Cui Hua's number and dialed her phone. But after ringing for ages, No one answered. Chui Hua was already in grave danger. It turned out Chui Hua had been trying to expose Godan's scam and had been targeted days ago. Now, she'd been beaten unconscious by Godan's accomplices. Not only had they destroyed all the evidence Chui Hua had gathered, but they'd also disconnected the liquefied gas line. This time, they intended to finish her off. Fortunately, Xiao Mei, who had seen through everything, sensed the danger to the nanny. To avoid her husband's suspicion, she didn't drive. Instead, she secretly hailed a cab to Chui Hua's home. Meanwhile, Chui Hua, fueled by her relentless drive for vengeance, gradually regained consciousness. She knew she couldn't die yet, not before bringing Godan to justice. With every ounce of strength, she pried open the window and gasped for fresh air. Fortunately, the doorbell rang just then. The voice outside confirmed it was Xiao Mei, but Chui Hua was too weak to crawl to the door. Chui Hua shouted, "There's a spare key in the shoe cabinet." With her sharp mind, she knew going to the hospital would only lead to discovery, but now she had gained another ally in her quest for vengeance. Soon, Xiao Mei brought Chui Hua to her cousin's home. Her cousin was Xiao Mei's most trusted confidant, someone she could rely on completely. Faced with Chui Hua's body covered in wounds, Xiao Mei initially considered calling the police for help. Chui Hua explained they just destroyed all the evidence she'd gathered, without sufficient proof. Alerting them would only scare them off. Xiao Mei seemed to be thinking too far ahead, but given she'd only recently learned the truth, it was understandable. Chui Hua was eager to tell Xiao Mei everything about Godan, yet she hesitated. Remembering Xiao Mei's previous stubbornness, Xiao Mei immediately declared she wanted to know everything about Godan. Chui Hua promptly retrieved the audio recording saved on her phone. Only then did Xiao Mei realize that Chui Hua had deliberately crashed into her that day to save her life. Otherwise, she might have perished in Thailand long ago. Chui Hua then revealed how Godan had secretly transferred assets and mortgaged properties for loans. Unfortunately, all this evidence had been destroyed by Godan's accomplices. Upon hearing this, Xiao Mei sprang into action immediately. Since Chui Hua couldn't appear publicly now, some evidence would require Xiao Mei to find personally. To uncover the evidence, they couldn't tip off Godan prematurely. Therefore, Xiao Mei had to act as if nothing had happened in front of Godan during this period. However, before their plan began, the experienced Chui Hua still wanted to warn Xiao Mei, "After you go back, be careful about the food Godan gives you. If anything seems off, contact me immediately." Today, they finally became true partners. Xiao Mei sipped the tonic her husband handed her, yet sensed something amiss in her mother-in-law's expression. Then she recalled Chui Hua's warning from yesterday. It instantly dawned on her that the tonic might be tainted, but to avoid alerting them, she drank it in front of her mother-in-law. After all, you can't see their true colors without entering the tiger's den. Soon, the potion's effects kicked in, plunging her into unconsciousness. When she awoke, she discovered ink marks on her fingers. She concluded her husband had forced her to sign property transfer documents while she was unconscious. Determined to uncover the truth, she secretly rummaged through the trash and found remnants of the potion. Exhausted, she prepared to go downstairs to the hospital, but at the living room corner, she overheard a shocking scene. Godan and his accomplice were discussing plans to commit Xiao Mei to a mental institution the next day. Xiao Mei recoiled in terror at the sight. Only then did she realize their scheme was nearing completion. Once committed, her assets would be completely divided among them. To gather evidence, Xiao Mei feigned ignorance to placate her husband, while secretly handing the supplement residue to Chui Hua for analysis. Godan never dreamed his wife had uncovered their conspiracy, and had already begun investigating him thoroughly. Soon, Xiao Mei's cousin arrived with the test results. With proof against Godan secured, the next step was reclaiming her property deeds. Xiao Mei continued feigning ignorance to lull her husband into complacency. Meanwhile, Chui Hua successfully obtained the tonic's lab report. The doctor declared it a controlled psychotropic substance. Long-term overdose would be equivalent to poisoning. With the supplement results secured, all eyes turned to the cousin. The 300 million loan he'd mortgaged those properties for wasn't even in his own name. Upon hearing this, Chui Hua immediately thought of a certain bank president. She wasn't just Godan's next target for fraud, but also the handler who processed his illegal loan. Finding her would reveal the money's whereabouts. Unexpectedly, when they confronted the bank president, she flatly refused. Little did she know that Xiaomei was no longer the timid woman she once was. Xiaomei immediately declared herself Godan's lover. The woman had no choice but to agree to accompany them. Only upon arriving at their destination did she realize Xiaomei merely sought information about the loan. This gave her the confidence to refuse Xiaomei once more. But she never imagined Xiaomei had meticulously prepared everything before approaching her. Seeing the lawyer present, the woman understood the gravity of the situation. After all, the loan amount had reached a staggering 300 million. If the woman insisted on pursuing it, she could face imprisonment. Highly vigilant, fearing retaliation if recorded, she simply wrote down the recipient's name with a pen. But when Xiaomei saw the name, it was completely unfamiliar. Moreover, there was no woman named Sun Wan in her husband's circle. At that moment, Cui Hua suddenly realized the woman must be Godan's mother. Only then did they understand that not only had Godan used a false name, but even her mother-in-law's name was fake. As the truth gradually came to light, the current bank president was no longer in any trouble. But before leaving, Xiaomei still wanted to offer her a friendly warning. Upon returning home, Xiaomei spotted a psychiatric hospital shuttle parked below her building. When she pretended not to notice and went inside, her husband had indeed slipped hallucinogenic drugs into her food again. She knew he intended to drive her insane, so he could legally commit her to a mental institution. Godan was swiftly advancing to the final stage of her scheme. But today, her plan might just backfire. The test results stunned Xiaomei instantly. Only then did she understand why she'd been experiencing bouts of mental instability lately. She immediately connected the dots: the psychiatric hospital shuttle downstairs and the mysterious liquid her husband had been adding to her food. It wasn't hard to deduce her husband's true goal: to have her committed to a mental institution. Sure enough, just as her husband approached to feed her the tonic, the shuttle attendant downstairs happened to walk toward her. But now she had no choice but to drink it. Refusing would surely arouse his suspicion, and if he grew suspicious, the danger today would be far worse than being committed. But just as she was about to swallow the concoction, she feigned nausea, dashed into the bathroom, and immediately vomited. She was certain this would not raise his suspicions. Being pregnant, nausea was a perfectly normal physiological reaction. This not only bought her time to devise her next move, but also preserved her husband's trust in her. She knew her husband wouldn't give up so easily. Sure enough, as soon as she emerged from the bathroom, he was ready to feed her the tonic again. But by then, she had already devised a foolproof plan to counter him. Xiaomei immediately claimed she'd been busy with the company's IPO marketing. If successful, her account would gain 30 billion in assets. Though her scheme piqued her husband's interest, he remained half convinced. Xiaomei then bluntly suggested her husband become the company's CEO. Godan perked up at the prospect of becoming a billionaire. Just then, Xiaomei spotted her mother-in-law lurking in the shadows. She knew her husband would eventually suspect something. To make the act convincing, they quickly devised a plan. For Godan to fully believe it, one person had to be involved. That person was none other than her best friend, whom she had previously fired. She knew her husband was still seeing this friend. Xiaomei promised to grant them freedom only after she divorced. With this assurance, she quickly gained her friend's trust. She even successfully invited her back to the company as a department manager. But as soon as they arrived at the company, Xiaomei made a decision that left her friend utterly bewildered. Due to personal reasons, she would gradually step back from her current responsibilities. She would also recommend Godan as the company's CEO. This news thrilled Luli beyond measure. Once her lover became CEO, she would become the lofty chairman's wife. But just as the company announcement concluded, Godan received good news from Luli. Now that she had secured the complete trust of both her husband and mother-in-law, Xiaomei's next move was to devise a plan to reclaim the property deed. Faced with the temptation of billions, Godan naturally prioritized his actions. To avoid suspicion, he quickly sought out the loan shark to retrieve the previously mortgaged deed. Unexpectedly, the lender demanded a 5 million yuan penalty fee. He intended to negotiate, but just then, his wife called. Unable to produce the money in this emergency, he resorted to pledging his own ID card to the lender just to get the mortgage deed back. But this was only part of the battle. To reclaim all the property deeds, he promptly sought out the bank president on the other side. The president had now seen Godan's true colors. Thus, This meeting lacked the former intimacy. Soon, Xiaomei successfully reclaimed 300 million yuan worth of property, marking a day worthy of celebration. But this was merely reclaiming what rightfully belonged to them, for the true main event was yet to begin. After celebrating, they discussed their next steps for revenge. Unexpectedly, assistant who discovered a shocking, unknown secret hidden deep within Godin's computer. It turned out they weren't marriage scammers at all. They were part of an organized, premeditated overseas pig butchering scheme. Assistant who covered her mouth, unable to believe what she saw. The densely packed employee list revealed every single target of the boss's schemes. But before assistant who could relay this information, Xiaomei uncovered another shocking revelation. Godin had converted all the stolen funds into gold, and it was precisely this discovery would gradually unveil all of Godin's hidden secrets. Xiaomei arranged for her cousin to follow her husband. Godin's destination was this suburban nursing home. When they received the news and arrived at the nursing home, Godin had already left. Yet they discovered something puzzling. In a nursing home spanning over 1,000 square meters, there was only one elderly resident, and he suffered from Alzheimer's disease. From the caregiver, they learned this elderly woman was Godin's biological mother. Only then did Xiaomei realize her mother-in-law had been an imposter all along. It was this moment she discovered she'd never touched the deeply buried secrets of her husband. After distracting the caregiver, Xiaomei intended to probe the elderly woman for Godin's hidden past, but the mere mention of Godin's name sent the old woman into an immediate emotional upheaval. At that moment, Chuihua discovered an old, dusty cell phone hidden in a drawer, which instantly revealed Godin's true identity. They finally learned that Godin had accumulated massive gambling debts overseas years ago. His mother, unable to pay off his debts, developed dementia. Ultimately, Godin, unable to repay the money, was sold to a fraud training facility. After being groomed by the facility, his life underwent a complete transformation. He soon defrauded numerous compatriots within the country. As his performance soared, Godin was promoted to department manager. Earning the camp's trust, he gained an opportunity to return to China for development. His first assignment back home was targeting this beauty salon owner, the very person now seeking revenge, Chuihua. Upon returning, he could have rebuilt his life. Yet, succumbing to the lure of money, he lost all humanity. Having slipped beyond the scheme's control, Godin divided each ill-gotten sum into two portions. One part was remitted to the scheme, while the other was converted into gold and hidden beneath the mattress in the nursing home. To maintain the facade, he not only opened the nursing home himself but also brought his mother to live there. Though Xiaomei had already guessed her husband's trajectory, Godin simultaneously received a call from the nursing home. When he dared to return to the nursing home to investigate, he discovered the mattress filled with gold had vanished. This scene sent his dreams of wealth rivaling a nation crashing to the depths. As his rage surged, thousands of ways to exact revenge on his wife flashed through his mind. Yet he hadn't realized the consequences awaiting him. Only when that old, worn-out phone appeared before him did panic seize him. Learning his identity was exposed, he returned home and vented to his partner. His partner, upon learning everything, quickly grasped his true intentions. Not only might the earlier asset transfers be uncovered, but the company's IPO could also be exposed as a sham. Wu Fu knew the impending consequences and understood that with evidence in hand, the other party would inevitably report it. To protect herself, she threatened Godin using his mother. She wanted Godin to take the fall for all the crimes. Wu Fu was Godin's direct superior in the domestic market. Faced with this predicament, internal strife quickly erupted between them. Now, Godin was not only abandoned by Wu Fu but also threatened to take the fall. With no other options, Godin resorted to a final desperate move. He never imagined assistant who had secretly planted a recording device in his home. Assistant who overheard his entire plan. Assistant who heard that Xiaomei was in danger. Without delay, she rushed over with the recording and the list she had previously discovered. With all members assembled, today would mark the ultimate battle in their quest for vengeance. They had finally uncovered all the evidence against Godin. It turned out Godin was actually from a Thai-based telecom fraud operation. She stared at the list her husband had deceived her with, until that familiar face appeared before her eyes. At that moment, she finally broke down. The girl in the photo was none other than assistant who had been by her side for 10 years. Their bond was like sisters, yet for some reason, assistant who seemed to be hiding something today. Upon hearing about the wedding, Xiaomei not only promised assistant Hu her salary in advance, but also agreed to personally attend the ceremony to offer her blessings. Little did she know that after this, assistant Hu vanished completely. Xiaomei then recalled the schemes her husband had used against her. She realized assistant Hu might now be dead in Phuket, Thailand, and her suspicions were, of course, correct. Xiaomei was consumed with guilt. If only she had woken up sooner, Go Dan wouldn't have gotten the company's employee roster, and without that roster, assistant Hu wouldn't have been deceived. With Cui Hua's comforting words, Xiaomei quickly snapped out of her self-blame. She was certain many other girls were still falling victim to Go Dan's schemes, and the evidence they had gathered so far was likely just the tip of the iceberg. Thus, Xiaomei resolutely made the most perilous decision today. She would return to gather more incriminating evidence against Go Dan and bring them to justice. Assistant Hu and Cui Hua couldn't comprehend Xiaomei's approach, since reporting it to the police would clearly resolve the matter. They hadn't yet realized that Xiaomei's decision already concealed a hidden intent to kill Go Dan. Cui Hua knew Xiaomei's return this time could be fraught with danger. For safety's sake, she pre-installed real-time monitoring software on Xiaomei's phone. That way, if Xiaomei encountered danger, help could arrive promptly. Cui Hua, an assistant Hu contacted every victim still active on the list to gather evidence. Assistant Hu even set up a dedicated communication group. Though things proceeded smoothly, Cui Hua encountered one stubborn woman. Her kind offer was not only rejected outright but also dismissed as a scam. Before leaving, she still offered a well-intentioned warning. Unexpectedly, she was immediately escorted out by security after speaking. Indeed, genuine concern can never awaken those lost in their own delusions. Xiaomei nearly fell for her husband's performance the moment she arrived home. Go Dan's acting was instantly recognized by Xiaomei, but to avoid alerting the others, Xiaomei didn't expose him on the spot. She intended to use this opportunity to lure out all of Go Dan's accomplices. Go Dan then spilled everything about the incident at the park to win his wife's sympathy. He even framed his greed as an unavoidable circumstance. Go Dan knew his wife hadn't explicitly forgiven him, but his heartfelt plea had already broken through her defenses. Little did he realize he was the one truly being manipulated by his wife. Believing he'd regained her trust, he promptly reported the situation to the very partner who'd abandoned him yesterday. As Xiaomei contemplated her next move, she suddenly discovered a hidden camera mounted high above. She knew her husband was spying on her. She reached to dismantle it, but paused mid-motion. She wanted to see what other tricks Go Dan had up his sleeve, and it was precisely this camera that would soon become her lethal weapon against him. Go Dan witnessed the entire brawl between his wife and Luli through the surveillance feed. What thrilled him most was the outcome: both had perished. Only then did he realize he was now the sole heir to the fortune. Little did he know his own life would be utterly destroyed in this conspiracy. He feigned ignorance as he came to inspect the scene. After confirming she was completely lifeless, he picked up a wine glass to celebrate, while pretending to be a victim's family member to call the police. But just as the call connected, Luli and Xiaomei's eyes suddenly snapped open in shock. In that instant, Go Dan froze. His scheme had long been uncovered by assistant Hu. First, he used sweet talk to promise running away with Luli, then coaxed out details of all her savings. Deeply in love, Luli immediately revealed his overseas account and admitted the 50 million yuan was embezzled from his wife's company. Unbeknownst to him, assistant Hu had planted a recording device in Luli's bag. Every word was transmitted directly to assistant Hu's ears. She immediately relayed the information to Xiaomei. Go Dan, returning home soon after, openly confronted his wife about Luli's embezzlement. This way, he could use his wife to fire Luli, while also fully regaining his wife's trust. Once Luli was left with no support, he would surely be desperate to flee with Go Dan. In that case, Luli's 50 million would be as easy as taking candy from a baby. But this wasn't Go Dan's primary objective. His true backup plan was to use Luli's hands to eliminate his wife. Once the scheme succeeded, his wife's 30 billion fortune would become entirely his own. Little did he know, his entire plot was already under his wife's control, to accommodate her husband's scheme and let him die with clarity. Xiaomei swiftly fired her best friend from the company, yet it was precisely Luli's harsh words that propelled Go Dan into the next phase of his plan. He knew that if his wife were murdered now, Luli would be the prime suspect. Soon, Godan not only swindled Lu Li out of his 50 million as planned, but then handed him a cup of drink. After Lu Li drank it, she immediately became disoriented. Godan spoke softly, mentioning that there was still one obstacle to running away with him. He promptly stated, "Xiao Mei is pregnant now. As long as the child is gone, I can accompany you anywhere." Yet these words took root and began to grow within Lu Li's increasingly chaotic mind. Once again, assistant who secretly recorded Godan's entire plan with a voice recorder. Lu Li then grabbed a baseball bat and headed toward Xiao Mei's home. Just as she was about to attack Xiao Mei, Cui Hua arrived, though they managed to restrain her together. Lu Li's strength far surpassed her former self. As they stood helpless, Cui Hua, prepared in advance, immediately administered a sedative to counter Lu Li's hallucinations. Only when Xiao Mei produced Godan's recordings of her exploitation did Cui Hua's disbelief turn to doubt. Faced with her own love, she wavered. Meanwhile, assistant who spotted Godan preparing to review the surveillance footage, knowing the moment was ripe, she immediately alerted Xiao Mei. Soon, assistant who produced props for the performance, not only pre-prepared blood packs but also plastic daggers to stab into the body. Their precise acting quickly made Godan see two corpses appear on the surveillance feed. Only when everything was laid bare before him did he fully realize his own acting was utterly flimsy. Lu Li, however, was the first to confront Godan with a soul-searching question. "Didn't you say you loved me and wanted to run away together?" Godan knew this was no place to linger and slipped away unnoticed. But upon arriving at the nursing home, he discovered his mother had been kidnapped by the accomplices. Their scheme had been exposed, and the accomplices now intended to silence both mother and son. Godan knew too much. Soon, they were led to a remote cliff edge. Godan witnessed his mother's departure with his own eyes. Though ruthless in his methods, he was still a devoted son. Driven to fury, he drew the dagger concealed behind his back in a moment of recklessness. With a single leap, he struck down the gang leader. As the gang members teetered on the cliff's edge, they dragged Godan with them into the abyss. His death may have been heaven's punishment,